sort of media, and they're the ones that kept the flame going too. This is Pat Ganal on the left, and Greg Sharp on the right. And this is the hero how to burn coming out of the owner's garage after a little bit of a storage session. And these strong cars, they don't go away. They stay in everybody's memory bank, and then at the right time, or somebody makes a new version of it, or something like that, they come back, and so it's like we're all working off this sort of wellspring of all these magazines we looked at years ago and things like that. And it really connects with what you see now and what you like. Go to the next one. I judged custom cars at Pebble Beach when they were there in 2007, I think it was. And this was a Jack Gloria 36. It was on the cover of Hot Rod in 48. And Roy Brizio restored it for Zaragoza. And, what you were finding was these cars that were important and cars that connected to people were getting either rebuilt, restored, or somebody make a new version of it. Go to the next one. This is Cool 50, which I think is Zoki, right?
Richard Zoki, yeah.
Yeah. And, Zoki, Johnny Agostino, a lot of other people in this room, they kept building what they wanted to build. And they found ways to, sustain that, to keep it going, usually out of purely their own effort, a lot of times their own pocket, And this was a real important one because it was just that sort of tipping point where things had gone off the radar and it was coming back. And Laramie bought this and he put it into a bunch of shows, and then from there it moved on to other things. Go to the next one. There's a lot of people building cars all over the country. California ones are better known because that's where the magazines were. And in the case of Rod Powell was connected with, Andy Southern and people like that. And Rod was, still his go-to guy, just get it done. And they were building cars for themselves, and they were building cars for like-minded individuals. And, between the shows that Penny and other folks, generated on the West Coast, all of a sudden these things were coming back into the magazines. Sometimes you get to an event, and this is to Kevin's credit, that's not a criticism, but you get to an event that's called a traditional event, and you get into a narrow spectrum. I personally think that's a wonderful thing, because I like seeing all these cars close together. They got a lot of similarities, and they connect in a lot of ways. And I also like going to those big shows too. They're fun too. But custom cars, they bridge out into lowriders. They bridge out into coach-built cars. They bridge out into a lot of different areas. So it's not just, a small group of people doing this. It's a large group. Who would have thought there'd be this many Zephyrs going together? I swear, it's like, did somebody pass out the Zephyr Kool-Aid or something? I'm working on one for a guy in Detroit, and he's had it for 40 years stored away. It's a Zephyr Roadster and a convertible. It's not a Roadster. Anyway, this, and big Cadillacs. Remember when big Cadillacs were just something you parked at the back of a used car lot, But those forms, this is a Chuck Jordan car. Chuck had a Cadillac studio when this one was done. Those cars, they just have this very sort of at the end of the spectrum approach to them. And they'll just always stay there. And somebody will just, it's literally a paint job, some pipes, and a set of wheels and tires and a lower, But it's just wicked. Years ago, I was with a friend of mine. We were in Paris, of all places, Paris, where you're driving around and everybody's in something that looks like it stores bread, They're driving that around. And this white Cadillac comes rolling down the street. And it was just, it was just like the best thing that could happen in your whole day. And Mercury's, my dad had a 49 when no one had a 49 Mercury. We were talking about finding parts the other day, and now it seems like you can find more parts for things because they're knocking half of them off someplace. You can usually fix them. You know, the Mercuries never went away. They just went into hiding. They were still the best car that Ford had done for quite a while, and they just kept coming back out. So Tim got about sitting in the middle over there, and this is Tim's car. Used to be my car. And my dad, for some reason, thought I really needed a 55 Buick. He didn't think I needed a 55 Chevy. He thought I needed a 55 Buick. And a guy by the name of Jim Bailey in Canada, who supposedly chopped his wife's car while she was away on vacation without asking her. And he's still alive. Jim dropped the top 3 inches. And his routine with these cars was basically he went around the base of the back window and windshield, cut them out, dropped them down, made a little drain trough. And all you do with the side glasses, you just don't roll it up as far, you know? So it's kind of, you didn't have to cut glass, you know, it was real easy. We moved the wheel wells up into the body side because I couldn't afford to channel something. So we moved the wheel wells and the trim up into the body side. But the way this car sits, right there, is pretty much how it would have been designed in the studio that Brian and I worked in. Because when they made those full-size drawings, they actually corrected for the fact that the drawing was on a flat plane, and the way your eye works, you know, because it's from a single vantage point, to simulate that effect, they would lower the roof and they would lower the car. Because when you're standing there, you're not looking at it as if it was a straight side view. So all we did to this, it's a lot of work, was we made it look like the sketch that they bought off on when it was designed in 1953, probably. And, you know, the behaviors happen in a different way, but the desire is a similar way. You know, Harley Earl was right. Everybody wants to be lower, leaner, and sexy. You know?
It was called cheating. To the effect of, you know, lowering visually the side view to make it look the way you'd see it in person.
This is Lone Star, Steve Wertheimer's event down in Texas, which if you haven't gone, start making plans. This is just a great line of cars, and they all have just a beautiful feel to them. When you get these traditional cars together in a single line like Kevin and Steve do, it's like listening to music and being in that right place when you heard that song, the best that it could be played, you know. And it was so funny, I ran into a guy in the parking lot. Who did I run into that drove Cadzilla? He was here earlier. He said he was going to try to make it. Anyway, that car, when it moves and you're driving it and you're just out in traffic and you're just kind of swimming along, that's what these things are about. In a place like this, you see them all together on the ground in an environment. It's just way cool. So here we are, we're facing, you know, I don't know if we'll ever get to legislated electric cars, okay? Lots of people take positions on lots of things. But when you look at the population density of the United States, where there's a lot of people and where there's not a lot of people, it takes all kinds of vehicles to solve those problems. And I worked for a company called Magna. They were the 3rd largest parts supplier in the world. They supply parts to everybody, Mercedes, everyone. So they make bumpers and batteries and all kinds of things. And we did a lot of forward broadcasting of what cars will need in the next generation. And it's hopeful that internal combustion will stay in some form. They'll be electric, okay? And a lot of people, they just want to drive a toaster. They just want to get from one place to another. But there's a lot of people that don't want to drive a toaster. And this is evidence of these ideas being supported and people believing that, yes, these cars are beautiful. This is the lawn down from the Capitol, and the Historical Vehicle Society puts up these little displays. And they've had hot rods in there, they've had a Shelby in there, they've had different cars in there, and they had here a Honnesburg in there. And between that and Pebble Beach and the collections that Brian works in and what people save, you know, just keep building, keep making beautiful cars. I think the whole thing's going to work out. It'll be painful, but it'll work out.
So this retro thing that started in '75 is echoing, obviously. A lot of different directions. This is kind of
Yeah.
one of the places we can go.
We got a slide sequence on it, or I did. Canzilla was built in like 6 months for $250,000, I think, at the time, you know. And probably 12, 20 people working on it, really fast. And it was a great owner. He did all the right things. He had the right idea. He had a personality that you could build a car around. And we had the best hot rod shop in the world. And it was a fast 6 months. The car on the upper right is a Smoothster. There's not a single piece of forged sheet metal in that. And it's all fabricated. Craig Neff did it, one-man show, you know. Boyd finished it, but it was pretty much, you know, wrapped up as far as the surfaces go. And it's an example of a modern Corvette drivetrain, modern aftermarket parts put together with an original body, or excuse me, with an original style to it. The Mercury on the lower right was a bit of a train wreck. Went to a couple different shops, and the third person involved in it, the last person involved in it, looked at the front sketch, which we always cheated, and thought, oh, I like that sketch better. I'll just cut 10 inches out of this Mercury, you know. So it ended up kind of not like a Mercury, but. And then, you know, on the bottom left is what I really wanted for a car, and it's a personal statement. And in a way, all those are, even though they were built in entirely different manners. So, you know, different ways to put things together.
So a couple of questions we want to answer before you guys have a chance to ask Larry and myself. Well, where do you think the future of customs is headed? You've been talking about that, but you want to say anything more?
Well, you know, when unleaded fuel came in, everybody was talking about changing valve seats and the world's ending and all this other stuff. Yeah, if you really like the way a combustion engine vibrates and feels and does, you can stand around and think, okay, it's all going to end. But you look at what's happening with enthusiast cars, and actually they're taking technology and getting the older stuff to work because, you know, Bill Jaganow can get a flathead to do something that a flathead used to not be able to do because you have modern tools, you have modern technologies. There's guys in lots of these hot rod shops that are using rapid prototype and things like that. So, you know, I think these motors will stay. Will they stay in volume? No. Electrification will win out because most people just want a toaster, you know. But the hope is, you know, you still got internal combustion. You know, you can still build the car you want to build.
The metaphor I like to use is that in 1900 there were 14 million horses in this country, primarily used for transportation. We still have horses. We're down to about 1 million, but they're for pleasure use now. They're for entertainment, they're for shows, they're for steeplechase, things like that. There's still a place for them. I was at on Saturday mornings, every Saturday during good weather on Woodward Avenue, there's the Pastiners Gathering. If you haven't done it, come on up and enjoy a Saturday with us. And it's everything on the spectrum, from wild supercars to customs and such. And a fellow pulled up the other day with a 2026 Dodge Charger, an electric, with the simulated exhaust. How many of you have heard these things? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I'm 65 and I'm old school. It doesn't feel real. It's an amazing replica. I mean, really, we're all standing around going, yeah, that's what a Hemi would sound like, you know. But it's just not genuine. And part of what I love about your cars is the purity, the honesty of what you guys do. And I think as long as that's maintained, there's going to be some avenue for putting out a custom that maybe it does have an electrification element. There's some great stuff from a lot of automakers that are a combination of, like I have a neighbor with a Ferrari that's a combination V8 and a hybrid electric. And each one's used at their strength in racing. We can see the hybrids and what's going on in IndyCar. So what questions do you have for Larry? Anybody?
I just gotta assume both you guys, I mean, I've watched you sketch out a Bonneville car and napkin at a Mexican restaurant, you know. Do you guys just have like stacks of drawings and no scratch paper with ideas on them, or I mean, how do you have a file system for your ideas, or are they just constantly flowing, or?
It's funny you should say that. We're in the process of moving, and I'm digging up all these things out of the house. Harry Bradley is the only guy. I worked for Harry for about 4 months back in the, I think it was the mid '80s, and Harry's the only guy I've ever seen that had everything organized. I mean, every single item, you know. But I think what happens is you know, because you're an externally focused person, you know, you're always watching what everybody else is doing. You know, I didn't have any Zephyr drawings until Rick came to me and said, I need a Zephyr, you know. And so you kind of just accumulate this stuff. Some people are better at cataloging it, but you really get, you know, you go to an event like this and you'll see something. You know, you'll see a car done in a certain way that you hadn't really thought about. And then you start sketching, messing around, you know. But yeah, we've got more drawings than you need.
I just imagine like a desk with just piles of paper on it.
I have a bookshelf. In the mid '80s, I started getting sketchbooks, bound sketchbooks, so that I could walk into a meeting, you know, and not pull out my drawing pad and all that. And I made it real clear in every meeting I had at General Motors and every job since that I'm going to sketch while we're talking. I can multitask. I tell my students this: you have to, if you're going to make it in this business, you have to be able to spontaneously sketch, listen, and stay engaged in the conversation. Not easy to do, but every great thing that I was a part of, the SSR, I did during a meeting. I was sitting there sketching while they were talking about the new Beetle and how it was going to, you know, bring retro back. And at the end of the meeting, my boss said to me, he said, what have we got in our toy box or our history that we could revive? And I showed him 48 to 53 Chevy pickup. This is one that everybody loved, and we could modernize it. And I already had the sketch. So I, you know, took that sketch and we did a scale model, and the rest went, you know, we went digital, and never intending to build the thing for a production car, just a concept. The answer to your question is I now have, it's probably 2.5 feet long of sketchbooks since the mid '80s that I always have with me, and I could pretty much know, okay, yeah, it was about the third book, about halfway in was when I had that idea. So when someone wants to see something, you got it. That worked that way. It's also backfired on me. When my sons we were going to the doctor, and when my wife was pregnant, and I always had this black book with me. And I remember one of the doctors looked at me and says, "You a lawyer?" What's with the book? And I said, "Oh, you know," and I showed him. But it's been, it's great to preserve all that stuff, and occasionally, with all the wonderful modern stuff, I publish it, you know, make a little booklet of it. So, any other questions?
Did we answer everything?
Yes, sir.
I have an XLR, which is just a beautiful car. A friend of mine was maybe your boss at one time.
Kip Wasenko?
Jerry Palmer.
Oh, Jerry? Yeah, he was my boss.
He said the car originally was set up to be 6 inches longer and the powers to be shortened. Is that?
That's about right. That's, if you look at my mock-up, yeah.
Gorgeous car. Love it.
Well, I'm glad you're happy with it. It was, yeah, it was a lot of fun to you know, we had a plant at 50% capacity, and that's what made the business case for building a Cadillac on a Corvette chassis. Other questions?